Hi there, I'm Mia Carver, and let me tell you, nothing prepares you for the day your own parents smile at you, while handing over your house to your brother like it's some party favor. It wasn't just the house. It was years of betrayal wrapped up with a bow. The sleepless nights, the sacrifices no one noticed, the family dinners where I smiled while they quietly planned to push me out. But the worst part? They didn't just try to take my house. They tried to erase me. You think that's bad? Wait until you hear how far they went to destroy me, all while calling it family. The air was heavy with jasmine and expectation that summer evening, thick enough to suffocate me as I stood at the entrance of my parents' estate in Charleston. Their historic southern mansion stood like a grand stage set for a play I didn't want to perform in. Chandeliers lit, silverware polished, the marble floors gleaming too much to feel real. My name is Mia Carver. I'm 32 years old, and tonight was supposed to be about me, my birthday. But deep down, I knew better. All week, my mother had flooded my phone with those all too familiar passive-aggressive texts. Don't ruin this night, Mia. Try smiling for once, darling. Family first. Be gracious to your brother. He deserves to shine too. Each message felt like a stone added to the weight on my chest. I almost didn't come tonight. Almost. The party was in full swing as I walked in, waiters floating past with champagne, cousins I barely knew air-kissing me like I wasn't the outsider in this picture. My parents were at the center, holding court. And there, in the middle of it all, was Bastian, my younger brother, dressed in a silk blazer, grinning like Charleston's golden boy. I smiled back, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. Inside, I was unraveling. Vivian, my mother, spotted me from across the room. She crossed the hall with her drink, her smile tight, voice dripping with faux concern. Mia, darling, I was worried you wouldn't show. Her eyes flicked over me like she was inspecting a blemish on a wedding cake. I wouldn't miss my own birthday, I said flatly. She leaned in, voice low but sharp like broken glass. You always make things so difficult. Can't you, for once, just be happy for your brother? This is family. Family. That word was their weapon. I nodded politely, excusing myself as she disappeared back into the crowd. Every step I took across that ballroom floor felt heavier, like I was walking toward something inevitable. As I made small talk with relatives, I caught Bastian's glance more than once, a smirk dancing on his lips, as if he knew something I didn't. I should have seen it coming. An hour in, the music dipped low, and my father, Magnus Carver, tapped his glass with a spoon. The crowd fell quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice warm, practiced. Tonight we're here to celebrate my daughter Mia's birthday, but, he paused, smile widening. We also have a special announcement. I glanced toward Alaric, our financial advisor, who stood by the back wall, already frowning. My stomach tightened. Magnus continued, holding a small velvet folder in his hand. As you all know, family is everything to us. So, tonight, in the spirit of that family, we have decided to present a special gift to my son, Bastian. Polite clapping erupted around the room. My ears began to ring. My father held up the folder. We're officially transferring ownership of one of our company properties, Mia's house. Laughter, applause, someone even whistled. I stood frozen, blood draining from my face. I glanced at Bastian, who gave me a cocky, knowing grin. Vivian stepped up beside him, hand on his arm, smiling wide. It's for the family, she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. You'll understand one day. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed up. The room blurred around me, guests clapping, nodding, smiling like this was the most generous thing they'd ever witnessed. Like I wasn't standing there, hollowed out, watching my life handed away like a party favor. Years of late nights at the hotel, skipped vacations, relationships sacrificed, all erased in that moment. When the applause faded, conversations resumed like nothing had happened. My parents beamed, Bastian soaked in the attention, and I stood there, crumbling behind the armor I'd built. Across the room, Alaric caught my gaze and subtly shook his head, as if to say, "Don't react now, they want a scene." I swallowed the lump in my throat, fists clenched at my sides. They thought this was over. They thought they'd humiliated me enough to keep me quiet. But if they thought I would stay silent after tonight, They had no idea who I had become. The echo of champagne glasses and hollow applause stayed with me long after I left that estate. The air outside had cooled, but the heat simmering in my chest burned hotter than ever. I drove home on autopilot, Charleston's quiet streets blurring past me like streaks of regret. By the time I stepped into my house, the house that apparently no longer belonged to me, the weight of the night finally hit me. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The moonlight spilling through the tall windows was enough to remind me this place wasn't mine anymore, at least not in their eyes. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag by the door, and sat motionless on the living room couch. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the side table. Another text from my mother. "You really should have smiled more tonight. It's about family, Mia." Family. That word had been weaponized so many times in my life, it had lost all meaning. I scrolled back through her earlier texts, the ones she sent in the days leading up to tonight. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Try not to embarrass us. Your brother deserves to shine too." The words blurred together, but the message was clear. Sit down, smile pretty, and let them take whatever they want. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty walls, the carefully curated furniture, the photographs I'd hung over the years. All of it was mine. And yet tonight, they'd decided it wasn't. Somewhere around 2 a.m, I finally dragged myself upstairs, but sleep never came. Instead, I lay awake, replaying every conversation, every smile that wasn't really a smile, every pointed glance between my parents and Bastian. By morning, the exhaustion hadn't left me. It had simply calcified into something sharper. Resolve. At exactly 8:13 a.m., an email notification flashed across my phone screen. Subject: Urgent. Need to see you. Alaric. A tight knot formed in my stomach. I got ready, pulled my hair back neatly, and left for the office. The Carver Hotel's headquarters wasn't far, downtown Charleston, tucked between historic buildings and cobblestone streets, a place I'd practically grown up in. I walked in, nodding at the front desk staff like nothing had happened, like the ground hadn't been ripped out from under me less than 12 hours ago. Alaric was already waiting in my office when I arrived. He stood by the window, arms folded, a manila folder resting on the edge of my desk. "You look like hell," he said without looking at me. "Good morning to you too," I muttered, shutting the door behind me. He finally met my eyes. "You need to see this." He slid the folder across the desk. I flipped it open. The numbers stared back at me, cold, indisputable. Unauthorized charges, unapproved expenditures, thousands upon thousands in marketing expenses that didn't add up. Alaric's voice was low, but sharp. "I ran a preliminary audit. This is just from the last 18 months, over $2.5 million in personal expenses, all funneled through the company's accounts." I flipped through pages, designer shopping sprees, luxury vacations, nightclub tabs disguised as branding partnerships, all tied to Bastian's name. "Are you kidding me?" I whispered, the bile rising in my throat. "It's systematic, Mia," Alaric said quietly. "He's been draining company funds for years. And guess who approved most of these expenses?" I didn't need to ask. My father's signature was stamped across nearly every page. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding in my ears. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It never was. "This isn't negligence," I said finally. "This is theft." Alaric nodded once. "You need to decide how far you're willing to go." I sat in silence, flipping through each damning page. 3 years' worth of betrayal, staring back at me in black and white. The irony wasn't lost on me. How they'd stood in front of friends and family last night, preaching about loyalty and family values while bleeding the company dry behind closed doors. I closed the folder slowly, my fingers tightening around its edge. "They made this personal," I said, voice calm but cold. "So I'm going to make it professional." I glanced up at Alaric. "Get me everything you can. Every transaction, every signature. We're not letting this go." His eyes narrowed slightly. Then he gave a small nod. "Understood." As he left the room, I looked out the window at the Charleston skyline. If they thought this was over, they were about to learn how wrong they were. A week crawled by after Alaric's discovery, each day heavier than the last. I went through the motions, meetings, paperwork, polite nods in hallways, while inside, something sharp twisted deeper every hour. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when the knock came, soft, hesitant, like bad news dressed up in perfume. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, there she stood, Vivian Carver, the woman who gave me life and spent most of it taking mine apart piece by piece. "Hi, sweetheart," she said sweetly, as if she hadn't tried to humiliate me in front of an entire ballroom days ago. The polite smile on her lips didn't reach her eyes. That's how I knew this wasn't a social visit. I stepped aside without a word, letting her in. She moved with practiced grace, heels tapping against my hardwood floors like a ticking clock. Vivian didn't waste time. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick folder, sliding it onto my kitchen counter. "It's just a formality," she said lightly, almost breezy. "Something the lawyers need you to sign." I didn't touch it. "What is it?" She tilted her head, voice syrup-sweet. "Nothing to worry about, darling, just housekeeping. You know how these corporate things are." My stomach sank. When my mother played sweet, it meant she had a knife behind her back. I opened the folder. My eyes skimmed the header first. Property transfer agreement. And then, in clean, cold legal language, the contents spelled it out. The house I'd worked for, bled for, lived in, was being reassigned to the company, so it could be gifted to Bastian. Legally, my name was there. A signature line waiting for me as if this betrayal needed my permission to be complete. I looked up slowly. "This is why you came here?" My voice felt like broken glass in my throat. Vivian's smile didn't falter. "You know how these things work, Mia. It's better for the family's image. Bastian will represent the brand better if the property is under his name. It'll look unified." She reached out, brushing invisible lint off her sleeve. "I know you don't like surprises, but this is what's best for all of us." All of us. I swallowed the bitter taste rising in my mouth. "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked quietly. "You're asking me to sign away my home." Vivian's face softened into mock concern. "It's just paperwork, sweetheart. You'll understand one day when you have your own family." Her words landed like a slap. Something cracked inside me then, not a break but a clean, sharp snap of realization. I set the folder back on the counter without looking at it. "You know," I said, voice steady, "I used to believe you when you said family sacrifices together." Her smile twitched. "Well, of course. But it's always been me, hasn't it?" I cut in. "I gave up everything. My weekends, my relationships, my life. So Bastian could party and you two could pretend we were this perfect family." Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly. The sweetness evaporated. "This isn't about you, Mia," she said coldly. "It's about what's best for all of us." There it was, the real voice behind the smile. I took a breath, gathering every ounce of the steel I'd spent years building. "No," I said firmly, "it's about control, and I'm done handing mine over." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Think carefully, Mia. Family comes first." I met her gaze head on. "Not when family treats you like property." The silence between us was louder than any argument. Vivian stood there a moment longer, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she slipped her handbag back over her shoulder and walked to the door. I didn't move until I heard it click shut behind her. Only then did I lean against the door, my chest tight, hands trembling. Not from fear, but from the weight of every unspoken battle finally coming to the surface. They thought they could push me over the edge. They didn't know how far I was willing to go. The door had barely clicked shut behind my mother when I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I spent the rest of that evening doing what I'd trained myself to do over the years, organizing, preparing, staying composed. For days after, I kept my head down at the office, making sure no one could see the storm brewing beneath my skin. My parents wanted me out of the picture quietly, and I knew better than to give them a reason to accelerate their plans. But I didn't have to wait long. Monday morning arrived like any other. I was sipping my black coffee at my desk, reviewing the week's meeting schedule, when my inbox pinged, subject, Carver Hotel's board memo, urgent review required. The sender wasn't Alaric. It wasn't even my assistant. It was my father. The blood drained from my face before I even clicked. When I opened the email, the words punched me in the stomach. Proposal, effective immediately. Carver Hotels recommends a restructuring of executive leadership. Mia Carver to step down as CEO and assume the role of COO, Bastian Carver to be appointed head of branding. Beneath it, an additional note in my father's handwriting, scanned and attached. Mia has become emotionally unstable and unable to lead. For the good of the company and the family's image, a leadership shift is necessary. I couldn't breathe. The very man who had groomed me for this role since I was 16, the man who told me I was the backbone of this company, was now writing me off like a liability. Without thinking, I picked up my phone and dialed Alaric's number. He answered on the second ring. "I was about to call you." My voice came out tight. "You saw it?" "Yeah," he sighed heavily. "And there's more. We need to talk." Within half an hour, we were sitting in the corner conference room at headquarters. Alaric closed the door behind him and slid another folder across the table toward me. "I ran deeper checks," he said quietly, "because something about all this felt wrong." I flipped the folder open and scanned the documents inside. It didn't take long before the numbers jumped out at me. Company assets, multiple properties, 2 hotel locations in Savannah and 1 here in Charleston, all mortgaged without board approval. A private loan attached to those mortgages, nearly $10 million. "For what?" I asked, throat dry. "For Bastian," Alaric replied grimly. "A personal business venture. Your parents signed off on everything, and they forged your signature to push the deal through." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all crashing down on me like a tidal wave. It wasn't just my house. It wasn't just my demotion. They were dismantling everything I'd spent my life building and using my name to do it. I stared down at the paperwork, my fingers trembling slightly as I flipped through page after page of betrayal. "They didn't just want my house," I murmured. "They wanted my life." Alaric stayed quiet for a moment, then leaned forward. "Mia, this isn't about the company anymore. It's about survival. They're trying to erase you." I took a shaky breath and looked him in the eye. "Then we stop playing defense?" He nodded once, understanding immediately. I spent the next several hours gathering everything: emails, financial statements, internal memos, the paper trail they thought I'd never find. Every signature, every forged authorization, every cent funneled where it shouldn't have been. By the time I finished, the sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across my office. I sat at my desk, staring at the mountain of proof, the sickening reality of what my own family had done. And then I opened a new email. To Board of Directors, Carver Hotels. Subject: Emergency Meeting Request, Financial Irregularities and Executive Misconduct. My fingers hovered over the keyboard one last time before I hit send. They thought they had silenced me. I was about to prove them wrong. The email to the board had barely left my outbox when I turned my focus to the next battlefront. I wasn't naive enough to believe the documents alone would be enough. I needed every loose thread tied, every name revealed. By Tuesday morning, I was back at my desk at Carver Hotels, scanning through the legal documents surrounding my demotion, the ones my father had tried to slip past the board like a formality. Each clause read like a dagger in disguise, but something else caught my eye. A sentence, a specific phrasing I'd seen before. It was the way the indemnification clause was worded, too technical, too polished. And I recognized it because I'd read it 100 times in contracts drafted by Tracy Dawson, the company's senior legal counsel, and my supposed friend. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. It wasn't unusual for her to review documents, but this wasn't a standard contract. It was a knife wrapped in velvet. By late afternoon, I couldn't shake the suspicion. I walked straight down to the legal floor and knocked on Tracy's office door. She glanced up, startled. "Mia, what a surprise!" I closed the door behind me and folded my arms. "Let's skip the small talk." Her smile faded just slightly. "What's this about?" I walked over to her desk and dropped the contract in front of her. "I recognized your language. You wrote this." She didn't deny it. "I oversee all executive contracts," she said evenly. I shook my head. "Don't lie to me. This wasn't routine. You buried the property transfer terms in the fine print. You knew exactly what you were doing." For a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes, and then she exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "It's just business, Mia," she said quietly. "Your parents asked me to make sure everything was airtight. In exchange, they promised me a partnership share once Bastion took over." My stomach turned. "You sold me out for a seat at the table?" Tracy's lips twisted into something like pity. "You've always thought loyalty mattered in this family. It doesn't." I stood there for a long moment, the weight of her words pressing hard against my ribs. Finally, I spoke. "You made your choice, Tracy. So will I." I walked out without another word, the click of the door behind me sounding louder than it should have. That night, back at my apartment, I sat at the dining table alone. The lights were dim, the city outside quiet. I opened my laptop and typed the words I never thought I'd send to my own family. To Vivian Carver, Magnus Carver, Bastion Carver. Subject, final warning. Any further attempt to take what is mine will be met with consequences. You've crossed every line. There won't be a next time. I read the words twice before clicking send. It wasn't anger that drove me anymore. It was something colder, sharper, a line I knew I would never uncross. Later that night, Alaric arrived, still in his office clothes, sleeves rolled up like he'd barely stopped working. "You sure about this?" he asked as he sat across from me. I nodded, sliding a thick folder toward him. "They've made it clear. This isn't about family, it's about power." We went over every document, every name, every move. "This isn't going to be pretty," he warned. "I'm not aiming for pretty," I replied. "I'm aiming for the truth." He looked at me for a long moment, then gave a small smile. "Good, because you're going to need every weapon you've got." I closed the file and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. What they didn't realize was that I had stopped playing by their rules. It didn't take long after I sent the warning email for them to make their next move. Mid-September mornings in Charleston had a certain crispness in the air, but that Monday, the chill I felt wasn't from the weather. It was from an email forwarded to me by one of our junior marketing managers. Subject: Carver Hotel's brand expansion party, exclusive invite. The invitation banner was sleek and expensive, dripping with curated glamour. A branding event, they called it. But the guest list told another story. Social media influencers, nightlife elites, celebrities with no connection to hospitality, and the signature at the bottom, hosted by Bastion Carver, head of brand development. My fingers curled around the mouse as I scrolled down the invite. The date was tomorrow night. The venue was one of our flagship hotels. The budget? A whopping $300,000 approved under Marketing and Guest Relations. I barely had time to process when Alaric burst into my office holding a stack of papers. "You've seen it?" he asked, shutting the door behind him. I nodded once. "I just did." He dropped the breakdown on my desk. "Take a look. This isn't an event. It's a party for Bastion and his influencer friends. No corporate value, no stakeholder outreach. It's a stunt." I flipped through the pages. Designer catering, exclusive VIP guest rooms comped for the night, an open bar contract, entertainment costs, all funneled through the company books. "This is theft in glitter and hashtags," I muttered. Alaric crossed his arms, jaw tight. "It's clear now. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. They think you're already out." I looked up at him, something icy settling behind my eyes. Well, they're about to find out otherwise. That night, I sat in my living room watching social media flood with clips of the party. #Carver Elite #brand of the South Bastion Carver event. Every post was worse than the last. Bastion posing with influencers, clinking glasses, speeches about how Carver Hotels was undergoing a new era of leadership. I didn't see a single client, investor, or board member in the crowd, but the whispers at the office the next day told me everything I needed to know. She's losing control. Maybe it's time for fresh leadership. Mia's holding the company back. I heard every word in the hallways, every smile too tight, every glance too sympathetic. By mid-morning, I had enough. I called Alaric to my office. "Draft me an internal memo," I said. He looked wary. "You're sure?" I nodded. "This isn't reactionary. It's necessary." Together, we outlined every point, effective immediately, A full audit will be conducted on all marketing and branding expenditures. Discretionary spending accounts are frozen. All financial authorizations will require my direct approval. Any prior approvals not cleared by my office are revoked. When I finished reviewing it, I added one more line at the end. This company will no longer tolerate personal indulgence disguised as corporate strategy. The memo was sent to every board member, every executive, every department head. The fallout was immediate. My phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from department heads, emails from PR, texts from my parents demanding answers. Alaric walked into my office a few hours later, eyebrow raised. You do realize what you've just done, right? I nodded. I stopped waiting for permission. That evening, after the chaos of the day finally settled, I drove to one of our downtown hotels, the rooftop bar I used to visit when I needed clarity. The city stretched below me, lights glittering like embers. I stood at the edge, breathing in the night air, letting the noise fade into a dull hum. They wanted to paint me as the villain. Fine, I'd be the villain, because monsters aren't the ones who start the war, they're the ones who finish it. The first thing I noticed that morning wasn't the light pouring through the blinds. It was the sound. My phone, buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. When I finally grabbed it, the screen lit up with missed calls, 37 in total. Board members, PR department, friends, and a barrage of text messages, all variations of the same alarm. Mia, have you seen the news? You need to respond now. What the hell is going on? With a sinking feeling, I opened one of the links someone had sent. Headline: CEO sister forces brother out. Family feud shakes Carver hotels. Below it, a photo of me and Bastian from 2 years ago, smiling stiffly at a corporate gala. The article painted me as a tyrant, a cold, power-hungry executive who pushed her younger brother out to claim sole control of the family business. Every word twisted, facts distorted. I barely had time to process when Alaric's name flashed on my screen. I answered immediately. Tell me you're seeing this, I said without preamble. He let out a breath on the other end. It's worse than you think. Bastian leaked internal emails. Selectively, of course. He's feeding them to the press, making you look like you orchestrated everything. My stomach clenched. I sat up, the sheet slipping off my shoulders. How? Through one of the junior legal clerks. Probably promised them a promotion. And it's not just one outlet, CNN, Business Weekly, even local stations. The story's everywhere. My inbox confirmed it. Hundreds of messages, some from reporters, some from board members, some from so-called friends who couldn't wait to weigh in. Scrolling social media was worse. #Carver family feud, #Mia the monster, #justice for Bastian. Every comment dripped with judgment. What kind of sister does this? She's destroying her own family. Another rich CEO who cares only about power. Vivian's message came in not long after. See what you've done to this family? I stared at the screen, my fingers numb. She wasn't upset about the lies. She was upset they were no longer the only ones controlling the narrative. By noon, the tension inside the office was thick enough to choke me. Colleagues I'd worked alongside for years avoided my gaze. Some even whispered behind closed doors, conversations that stopped the moment I entered the hallway. It wasn't paranoia. I knew Bastian, and I knew how he worked when he felt threatened. By late afternoon, I walked into one of the senior manager's offices. Mark Ellis, head of operations. He barely looked up. Got a minute? I asked. He nodded stiffly. I closed the door behind me. Let's not pretend, I said. I know you've been in meetings with Bastian. Mark sighed, rubbing his forehead. People are nervous, Mia. The company's image is tanking. Investors are calling. Staff don't know who to trust. I leaned forward, voice low but sharp. Let me make one thing clear. I'm not the one who dragged this family feud into the spotlight, but I will end it. Mark met my eyes finally, something like doubt flickering behind his. That night, back in my apartment, Alaric sat across from me, laptop open between us. We have enough, he said quietly. Everything's ready. I nodded. Schedule the emergency board meeting. He hesitated. Once this is public, there's no undoing it. I didn't blink. They made it public. Now they'll face the truth. I spent the next 2 hours organizing files. Financial records, audit reports, legal documents, every forged signature and manipulated account. My arsenal. If they wanted a war in the spotlight, I was about to blind them with the truth. The boardroom had never felt so cold. It was early October, the air outside still clinging to the last breath of summer, but inside, the tension sucked all warmth from the walls. I arrived early, my files tucked under one arm, my steps deliberate. The long mahogany table stretched before me like a battlefield, chairs slowly filling with board members and senior executives, some avoiding my gaze, others watching me too closely. Across from me sat my parents, Vivian and Magnus, their expressions carefully neutral. And beside them, Bastian, scrolling casually through his phone as if he wasn't moments away from losing everything. I didn't speak until the last chair was filled and the door clicked shut. "Let's begin," I said, voice calm, even though my pulse thundered beneath my skin. The CFO glanced at me, hesitant. This emergency meeting was requested by Miss Mia Carver. I stood, placing the first folder in front of me. "What you're about to see is not just about leadership disputes or family disagreements," I began. "It's about betrayal, fraud, and the misuse of power." I flipped the folder open and slid copies across the table. Audit reports, financial statements, copies of my own forged signature, receipts, emails, mortgage agreements, all pointing to one conclusion. For years, I continued, company funds have been redirected for personal use, luxury parties disguised as marketing events, private loans secured against corporate assets without board consent, forged documents, and it wasn't accidental. A murmur rippled through the room as pages were flipped, brows furrowed. Magnus leaned forward, voice strained. "We can handle this internally, Mia. No need to drag the company's name through the mud." I met his gaze, unblinking. "You didn't hesitate to humiliate me publicly. We settle this publicly." Vivian shook her head. "This is family, Mia. You're destroying it." I wanted to laugh, but my throat was too tight. "No," I said evenly. "You destroyed it the day you decided my loyalty was something you could exploit." One board member, Mr. Carrington, cleared his throat. "These are serious allegations." "They're not allegations," I replied. "They're facts." The next hour passed in a blur of questions, clarifications, documents handed back and forth. Bastian remained quiet, arms crossed, jaw clenched, while my parents grew increasingly pale. Finally, the CFO spoke. "It's clear we can't ignore these findings." A vote was called. One by one, hands were raised around the table. In favor of removing Bastian from all executive roles. In favor of freezing all personal company accounts pending investigation. In favor of restructuring leadership and tightening financial controls. Each vote felt like a nail sealing the coffin of what my family had built. When the last hand went up, the room fell silent. Magnus looked smaller somehow, slumped in his chair. Vivian refused to meet my eyes. Bastian pushed his chair back with a screech and stood abruptly. "This is a mistake," he spat. "You'll regret this." He didn't wait for a response. He stormed out, leaving only the echo of his footsteps behind. My parents followed shortly after, my mother pausing just long enough to throw me a look so sharp it could have cut glass. And then the room emptied, one by one. I remained seated, staring at the pile of papers in front of me. I had won the war, but the battlefield was covered in blood. 3 months had passed since the vote, since the boardroom showdown that burned everything to the ground. The boardroom itself was long behind me, just another sterile space with polished mahogany, glass walls, and the echo of raised voices. But even now, the ghost of it lingered. Some rooms stay with you, not because of what they hold, but because of what you left behind in them. Outside, Charleston's January air pressed sharp against my skin when I stepped out each morning. It had that bite to it, the kind that cuts through you, crisp and cool, almost surgical in its clarity. The holidays had come and gone, and as the new year unfolded, it didn't feel like a fresh start. It felt like aftermath, a reckoning. The fallout had come faster than anyone expected, quicker even than I'd prepared for. Bastian resigned within days of the board vote. His image, once carefully curated and broadcasted to investors, influencers, and the glossy business magazines, crumbled overnight. He didn't even bother to hold a press conference. There was no carefully worded statement, no attempt at damage control, just a line in an email, followed by silence. The media had turned on him instantly. Those same outlets that had sung his praises weeks before now published exposés about backroom deals, nepotism, manipulation. Investors who had once sat beside him at charity galas stopped returning his calls. His social circles evaporated, faster than the ink on the papers that sealed his fall. Magnus and Vivian didn't fare much better. The legal proceedings that followed left them cornered. Quietly, without a word to the public, they relinquished their controlling shares of Carver Hotels. No apology, no explanation. Their exit was as cold and calculated as the maneuver that started this war. By February, Carver Hotels was almost unrecognizable. The company restructured from the foundation up. Compliance officers were hired. The board expanded to include independent members who had no blood ties to the Carver name. The Financial Audit Committee was no longer a formality. It became a watchdog with real teeth. And the family name? It was removed from every executive expense account, every side fund, every shadowy trust. For the first time in decades, Carver Hotels wasn't a family business. It was just a business. It was everything I fought for, everything I said I wanted, and it cost me everything. By Christmas, when the dust had settled, I found myself standing in front of my parents' house, the same house I hadn't seen since the night the boardroom battle ended. I hadn't planned to come back. There had been no invitation, no olive branch extended. But Alaric had said something to me one night as we worked late in my office, after everyone else had gone home. "You fought the fight, Mia," he'd said. "At some point, you have to decide what peace looks like." So there I was at their doorstep, holding a bottle of wine I didn't expect anyone to drink. The door opened slowly. Vivian stood there, thinner than I remembered. Her sharp edges dulled, not by time, but by defeat. She didn't smile. She barely looked at me. "Merry Christmas," I offered, my voice low, uncertain. She nodded once, stepping aside to let me in without a word. Inside, the house felt unfamiliar. It wasn't that the furniture had changed. It hadn't. The paintings on the wall, the crystal on the mantelpiece, the quiet hum of something classical playing in the background, it was all exactly the same. But it felt hollow, empty in a way that had nothing to do with space. Magnus sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames like they held answers. He glanced up briefly when I entered, his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second before he turned back to the fire without speaking. Bastian wasn't there. I hadn't expected him to be. Last I heard, he'd moved to Atlanta. No headlines, no fanfare. Word was he worked an entry-level marketing job now, under someone else's name to avoid the press. It was strange how fast the mighty fall, and how quietly. Dinner that night was a hollow ritual. The conversation was stiff, filled with forced pleasantries and long silences. No one talked about the company. No one mentioned the lawsuits or the headlines or the fact that everything that had once defined us was gone. When I left that night, walking out into the cold December air, I finally understood something I hadn't before. There was no going back. Some bridges, once burned, aren't rebuilt. They stay ash, crumbling beneath your feet every time you try to cross them. In the months that followed, I focused on what remained. The company stabilized, piece by piece. Employees who had once whispered about me in the hallways now began to trust my leadership, not because of the name on my badge, but because of what I did. Because I showed up every day, sleeves rolled up, doing the work. I stopped waiting for the next betrayal. I slept more nights at home instead of in hotel rooms or the boardroom, stopped checking my phone at 2 a.m. for the next crisis. And Alaric, he never left. We became something more solid in the quiet aftermath. Not just business partners, but something real, something that had nothing to do with contracts or strategy. One evening in February, walking along the Battery as the sky turned lavender and the sea air pressed cool against us, he glanced at me and asked casually, almost like it didn't matter, "Ever think about starting a family?" For the first time in what felt like years, I smiled without hesitation. For the first time, I said, "I think I'd be ready." But the real healing, the kind that mattered, happened quietly. without headlines or ultimatums. One Saturday afternoon, months after the dust had settled, I found myself back at the house. Not the one I grew up in, the one they tried to take from me. My house. The January sun hung low, casting long shadows across the porch. I sat there with a cup of coffee, the hum of Charleston moving around me in the distance. For the first time in a long time, there was no noise in my head. No strategy forming, no defense ready, just quiet. I had fought for this house, for the company, for the truth. But the fight had never really been about them. Not my parents, not my brother, not the board. It had been about me, about reclaiming something they had tried to take from me long before they touched my title or my property, my worth. They tried to make me small, replace me, dismantle me, piece by piece. But I was still here. And as I sat there, watching the sky shift from gold to indigo, the weight I'd been carrying for years finally eased. Not all the way, but enough. Justice had never been about revenge. It was about something quieter, something steadier. It was about finally reclaiming myself. Before I end this story, let me leave you with something I wish someone had told me sooner. The truth is, sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you will be the very ones who tear you down. And when that happens, you have two choices. You can shrink yourself to fit their expectations, or you can stand up, even if it means standing alone. What I learned through all of this is that family isn't about blind loyalty. It's about boundaries, respect, and the willingness to walk away when love turns into control. I fought not just for a house or a company. I fought to remind myself, and maybe you too, that your worth is not defined by how much you tolerate. So let me ask you, have you ever stayed silent just to keep the peace, even when it cost you everything inside? If this story touched something in you, let me know in the comments. Drop a 1 if you've ever had to stand up for yourself, even when it hurt. Or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know who's out there listening. And if you didn't like this story, tell me why. What part made you pause? What part made you angry or made you think? Most importantly, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next story.